Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrej Miller, and I work for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And today I'm going to be talking to you about affordable and clean energy. Now, this is supposed to be a double act, so I'm hoping my colleague Sally Fenton will turn up in about the next 10-15 minutes. But anyway, we can start regardless. So, I'm focusing really here on two key documents that the government and the department I work for has published over the last 6 months or so that link very closely to that goal of affordable and clean energy, as well as wider goals for Great Britain. So the Clean Growth Strategy was published last October, and it is, as it says, a strategy for reducing our emissions, but also to do that whilst expanding the British economy, recognising that there are huge opportunities for clean growth. So it focused on broadly in 6 key sectors, as you can see there: business and industry efficiency. There's a lot of scope there. Low carbon transport, a massive challenge for us, and something that, if Sally turns up, she'll be talking about a bit later. I wanted to focus on just a few of these. So, for example, the challenge of clean, smart and flexible power. So we've now committed as a country to stop coal-fired electricity production from 2025, which is a big commitment, and other countries, particularly in Europe, are following suit on this. But there's also a big challenge of integrating lots of renewable energy and intermittent renewable systems into the energy system, and doing that as part of a whole new smart grid. And the other one that I particularly, an area I work in, is improving our homes. So we have in the UK amongst the worst homes in the world in terms of energy efficiency, and that's for a number of reasons, partly because they were well built when they were built many hundreds of years ago, but also because our climate hasn't necessitated us to insulate those homes. So we have a big aspiration to seriously improve the energy efficiency of those homes over the next 15 and 20 years. So alongside, or slightly later than the Clean Growth Strategy, the government published the Industrial Strategy, and you may have heard a lot about this. It's something that governments have done over the decades, but there hasn't been an industrial strategy in this country for a long while. It's a real project for the Prime Minister as well, and it's about basically the key goal is improving the productivity of the UK economy. So whilst economic growth has been reasonably good compared to other countries over the last decade or so, actually our productivity when compared to other particularly G7 economies is bad, to put it bluntly. We are roughly 20% in terms of productivity behind France and Germany, for example. And clean growth is a key part of that industrial strategy. So reducing the carbon emissions of our country whilst making our economy more competitive and more productive, they go hand in hand. And I'll go on to talk about, for example, how energy efficiency can contribute to that a bit later on. So here's the Clean Growth Grand Challenge. So it's about reducing the emissions of everything we do whilst our economy grows and seeks to benefit from the advantages of decarbonisation. People have often in the past seen renewables, energy efficiencies, maybe nice to haves or even not nice to haves. You know, people referring in the past to green crap, whereas now it's becoming recognised that we need to decarbonise, but there are ways of doing it whereby our industries can be involved in that growth, and also our citizens can benefit from that. So that will mean, for example, smart systems. At the moment, we've got a centralized energy system whereby you have big power stations taking power to your home, roughly speaking. That system has been changing over the last 10 years or so, with more localized energy generation, and, for example, people being able to generate their own electricity through, for example, solar panels. Eventually, what we want to get to is a much smarter, localized system where you will be incentivized to use energy when it is cheapest and also when it is lowest carbon. So, for example, when there's an excess of wind or when there's an excess of solar energy. A key part of this is innovation. So again, innovation is a central theme of both the industrial and the clean growth strategy. We've got lots of products out there, and you'll see them around this hall, that do the job of insulating the home. But let's use solid wall insulation as an example. So in this country, we have around 8 million solid wall homes. So broadly speaking, anything built before the Second World War. Now, those homes, to get them to a reasonable level of energy efficiency, you need to put insulation on the outside. Currently, that will cost anywhere from £8,000 if multiple homes are insulated, to over £10,000 if insulating a single home, and that's partly because of you're putting material all over the outside of your home. That material is not necessarily very expensive, but it requires quite a lot of manual labour, scaffolding, etc. So if we are to insulate those 8 million homes, and we've insulated fewer than 1 million thus far, we're going to need some innovation both in the products that are put on those walls and in the way they are put on those walls. But it's also potentially about business models. So can they be financed in a way whereby the cost to the consumer falls? So getting into a bit more of the detail of the clean growth strategy. So the clean growth strategy fundamentally is something that the government had to do because we have what's called the Climate Change Act, which came into being in 2008 with great cross-party support and great fanfare, because the UK was at the time the first country to have binding legislation to meet a target of reducing our carbon emissions by 80% from 1990 to 2050. And to basically hold government to account, the Act also, or successive governments to account, because such legislation is relatively rare, such long-lasting legislation. There's a series of carbon budgets, and so they're set in 5-year periods where government has a clear aim of reducing the carbon dioxide or equivalent emissions to a certain level during each 5-year period. And basically the way it works is that the Committee on Climate Change each 5 years says this is what, as government, what you should do in order to achieve these, or rather this is what the budget should be and this is the way you should achieve this, and government is bound to respond to that. And so the Clean Growth Strategy is the response to the Committee on Climate Change that government was legally obliged to publish, which sets out the strategy for meeting Carbon Budget 5, which is from 28 to 32. But actually a lot of what's in there will also have an impact throughout the 2020s. On top of that, and part of this is, as I say, linked to the economic opportunities, but also sort of political acceptance of reducing carbon emissions so quickly. It's linked to the growth agenda, as I said. This is just what it looks like. So you may have seen the document, and again, it was something drafted not just by our department and agreed by our ministers, but this is a cross-government document, so it has got cross-government support. And again, this sets out what what it's trying to achieve. So if you were to remember, distill this into an even shorter, pithy line, then it would be reducing emissions while maximising economic growth. So as I mentioned earlier, actually economic growth in the UK has been relatively good. I mean, it may not have felt that to everyone over the last 10 years in particular, but compared to the other big, the G7 economies, so this slide basically compares, here you've got comparison of GDP growth since 1990, which is the base year for the emissions reductions, with the UK roughly in step with other G7 economies. But actually, when you compare emissions, UK emissions, which is this line, have fallen much faster. Now, a lot of that is because of the changes in the economy. So, for example, a shift from industry to the service sector will have a big role to play in reducing those emissions, and also there will be we had what was called as dash for gas. So because of our North Sea gas reserves, especially in the early to mid 90s, we moved away from coal generation and towards gas generation. A big change that was really not anticipated 10 years ago was the massive reduction in the cost of renewables. And actually what this doesn't capture, so what we do have is solar PV costs falling, and this is just since 2009. And I remember working on policies at around this time when it was seen as only a niche technology that few rich people would maybe install on their roofs to appear to be green, whereas actually you'll see massive 80% reductions in costs. Similarly, onshore wind, and what this doesn't yet show is exactly how offshore wind has fallen in the last 2 years, because of the data hasn't quite caught up. But costs of offshore wind have fallen massively, and that's again because there was government support 10 years ago. Government support increased to a lot of opposition again at the time. So we've got now economies of scale, vast innovation, massive reductions in cost. So that what this line shows is gas generation, and so you can see that in certain situations these technologies now have parity with gas. Some key milestones were that, for example, recently the first large-scale solar PV farm was built for the first time without subsidy. A big milestone, and even, as I said, in the last 10 years the costs of offshore wind have fallen dramatically, and that's also a big success story for Britain in terms of industry, because a lot of those blades are being built in factories in the UK, so in the northeast particularly, and now the UK is the biggest generator of offshore wind. Now there could potentially be opportunities also in future with tidal technologies. They're much further away from being deployed on a mass scale. You may have, for example, heard Swansea Barrage being mentioned, but the UK has some of the best tidal resources also in the world. So there are massive opportunities for the UK to build on the successes here. And if you think the cost of PV, this is the cost of actually generating energy using PV. We're not a particularly sunny country, so in many much sunnier countries, it's obviously even more competitive. As I say, this is all good, but getting back to where we are here, we're meeting, or we've met the first two carbon budgets, but you're basically picking off the low-hanging fruit here. It then gets much more difficult. And again, 10 or so years ago, when first renewable energy strategy was published, we anticipated a very different mix. We didn't anticipate the cost of renewable electricity falling by as much as it has, and we thought we'd achieve a lot more with transport and heat. And actually they've proven much more difficult to decarbonise. You had the cost of renewables falling, but we haven't had the opportunity to, for example, put biofuels into cars to the same extent, and decarbonising heat is much more difficult, partly because we've got the infrastructure. Over 80% of homes in this country are on gas, and it's relatively cheap heating with the infrastructure in place, so it's much more difficult to replace it. Another way of looking at the sectors here is what they all contribute. So as I say, power, much easier to decarbonise. Transport, despite especially the rhetoric around electric vehicles, a lot can be done there, but much more difficult than what's been achieved with electricity generation. Here is where the growth part comes in. So again, this is just focusing on electricity and how much global investment is expected in power generation, and you will see the difference in low carbon and fossil fuel technologies. So most of the growth, the world as a whole is expected to consume more energy as we go forward, despite efforts on energy efficiency. Developing economies will be consuming more and more, but the biggest amount of growth will be in renewable, or you can never tell for certain, but most forecasts are that the most growth will come from renewable energy or renewable electricity. So I think this is recapping much of what I've broadly said, but the key figure here that certainly politicians like to focus on is this investment in innovation, and 2.5 billion being invested between 2015 and 2021 in various sectors to decarbonise and help growth. So I'm going to quickly focus, given it's a show about buildings and homes, largely on energy efficiency and energy efficiency in the home. So the benefits that this can bring are huge. You may have heard it said that the cheapest unit of energy is the one you don't use. So all these challenges around transport, or particularly in our homes, it will be easier to decarbonise if we have to use a lot less energy in the first place. We may want to pump hydrogen or biomethane into our existing gas grid. We may want to put heat pumps, lots of heat pump stands around here, but they are expensive. They will put more strain on the electricity grid. This will all be easier if we need less energy to heat our homes in the first place. And there are many benefits to people. So if you improve the energy efficiency of your home, it might become less damp, and you might have fewer structural or health issues. Jobs, this is solid wall insulation going on the outside of homes. So again, local jobs. These aren't massive companies in the southeast. These are generally SMEs around the country doing this work. You may not like necessarily what this looks like, but it can improve the look of homes. So this is a Dutch company. It's called an Energie Sprong insulated houses, which produce net zero energy homes, and it can also lead to a sort of regenerative effect. So if an area is run down, we've seen examples under government schemes where whole streets have been insulated, and the area looks better. People are more proud of the area they live in, and it has many more positive effects, and hopefully sort of happy people at the end of it. This circle just shows the multiple benefits of energy efficiency, and this is actually I think from the International Energy Agency. But you can see that there are lots of benefits. Just to illustrate it, maybe if you put up energy efficiency in your home, you could spend up to £300 with solid wall insulation, £300 less a year on your heating. You've paid for someone to do that work locally, so help to a local company. You then have more disposable income, which you may spend in the local economy. Your health may improve. You've reduced greenhouse gas emissions. We need to import less gas into the country, thereby helping our security of supply. It might even help political situation. I know I'm extrapolating here, but then you have to import less gas from countries you may not want to necessarily import gas from. So huge potential benefits if you extrapolate just all of us using less energy in our homes. And the performance of our homes has improved significantly in recent years. So this is electricity and gas consumption in homes, and this is partly due to energy efficiency measures, but also we think, because we can just look at the data, but we think it's actually people just changing their behavior, because we cannot account for this entire decrease from policies and energy efficiency measures. And so some of it, as I say, so this is the improvement of residential energy efficiency, and as you can see, it's broadly speaking based on the EPC, the Energy Performance Certificate ratings. So an upward line is an improvement. The challenge is, however, that the aspiration is to get all homes to here by 2035, which is a massive aspiration given, so G is the worst, A is the best, based on the EPC certificates. When a new build home should be here in this category, so it won't necessarily even be A, but it certainly should be here. Whether they are all in that category or not is another matter. But there's a huge shift to get these homes over here. These G homes may be old homes, rural areas, off the gas grid, no central heating at all, maybe using electricity, and consequently you can see the differences in average annual energy costs. So the average bill in the UK is roughly around that D mark. So massive challenge ahead, and what we have alongside this is a sort of social challenge of fuel poverty. So many of us may be comfortable with our energy bills. In fact, most people, when surveyed in the UK, say they don't care about their energy costs. They're not particularly bothered about price rises, despite quite a lot of media coverage when price rises do go up. Where it does hit people is those on low incomes living in these homes will either have to sacrifice other things, i.e. other essentials like food, in order to heat their homes effectively, or they won't heat their homes effectively, and that's where you will get a lot of health issues, both mental and physical, if people are constantly living in cold homes. There can also be impacts on educational attainment. So again, going back to the benefits I was talking about earlier, helping those homes could actually ease the pressure on the health system, as well as all the other benefits that I mentioned earlier. So here we're not going to read through all of this, don't worry, but here are some of the key commitments around homes. So reducing emissions, but as I've mentioned, that aspiration is a real step forward from where previous governments, or what previous governments have been willing to commit to. It is only an aspiration, and there are quite a lot of caveats around it. Nevertheless, it sets a clear path for what we want to achieve, and we want to get there. This is missing a band C by 2030. So again, helping those people who are more in need. We want to get to EPC band C for fuel poor households by 2030, so 5 years earlier, so that the money is being spent where it potentially has the most impact. Because if those people, as I say, are underheating their homes, there will be other costs in the economy as a result of that. Here, again, you'll be able to look at the slides, but These are basically the things that the government has already done since publishing the strategy last October. So we're looking for ways, for example, here we're looking for ways to create a market in energy efficiency. Basically, most people don't want to do this stuff. It's easy to sell someone a boiler when their boiler's broken because they need to heat their home. It's much more difficult to persuade them to have people come round their house, maybe put scaffolding around it, and have 2 weeks worth of disruption, despite some of those immediate benefits to them. And part of the problem is not just that there's a lot of disruption, but also the benefits fall to the wider economy. So I, as a householder, may not particularly care that I'm boosting jobs in the local economy. I just care about how much it's going to reduce my bills. So there's a wider question there as to should we as individuals actually be funding all of this, given the benefits fall to society as a whole, and obviously climate change and carbon emissions are the ultimate sort of externality. We're saving them, it's not going to affect us so much, but it may affect, it will affect the society as a whole if we all make that effort. So this is my last slide, although Sally is here, I think. I'm starting to panic. So this is my last slide. So again, these are basically some of the future commitments that we want to achieve, and it is about introducing policies that will make this transition much easier, and actually something that people will embrace and will have positive impacts on the economy. So you can find the Clean Growth Strategy online if you're interested, and also the Industrial Strategy if you have an interest in this. So thank you from me, but I'll pass over to Sally, who's going to talk to you more about smart energy systems and vehicle-to-grid technologies, which might be other things that could impact you in future.
Hello, thank you, Andrej. I'm very pleased to be here at ecobuild this afternoon. I'm Sally Fenton. I have the lovely title of Head of Smart Energy Innovation, and smart is a kind of rather nebulous term that can be expanded or shrunk to cover quite a lot of things in the energy system. So, just a very quick rush through. I think some of the slides may look familiar to what you've just seen, so a quick recap. So what our aims are to work in terms of delivering the decarbonisation targets set out in the UK Climate Change Act. So we're aiming for the 80% decarbonisation target by 2050 compared to 1990 baseline figures. At the moment, we're at about 40% decarbonisation compared to those 1990 figures. We still have a way to go, and you can see just from the chart on the right here that energy, if we include transport as well within that, so energy in its broadest definitions, including heating, electricity, power and transport, accounts for more than 80% of UK emissions. So there's a big focus on energy in terms of ensuring that we meet our carbon targets. One of the things that we are aware of, which helps to drive our innovation activity, is that if we carry on our current projection with the technologies, the generation technologies, but also other enabling technologies, it means that we're not going to hit those carbon targets. So you've already heard about the Clean Growth Strategy. From the point of view of innovation, the Clean Growth Strategy also set out some very specific commitments to funding for clean growth innovation, setting out that £2.5 billion of innovation support will be available over the period up until 2021 to support innovation in low carbon technologies. And that will be across the board in terms of generation technologies, in terms of renewable generation, in terms of building efficiency innovation, innovation measures to deal with homes and businesses, and the smart energy innovation, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about specifically today. So smart energy and smart energy innovation I think this will be fairly familiar as a sort of concept to a lot of you. So the challenges that we have in our energy system is that as we move to more renewable sources of generation to help meet those carbon emission targets, we introduce more and more renewable generation technologies like offshore wind and solar. So really good in terms of helping us to meet our emissions targets and to decarbonize and to move to cleaner air issues. With the introduction of other electric vehicles as well. But all those technologies, those renewable technologies, are intermittent by nature. So, and more inflexible than our generation sources that we're used to. They're also more distributed, so we're used to very centralized generation with then the sort of feed-out grid. And increasingly, those generation sources are not just distributed, but they're really, really distributed. So they're on our own houses. You have solar panels on your roof, or you may have an electric vehicle yourself. So you individual consumers and businesses are also becoming part of the energy system. And while, as I said, there are decreases in demand that have come about over a number of years as our technology has become more efficient, so it uses less power, but also as we think about how we decarbonize transport and how we decarbonize heat, then it's quite likely that we'll start to see increases in demand in our electrical power over the next few decades. So, how do we deal with these intermittency and distribution? So we think that a cost-effective way of doing that will be using some of the smart energy technologies. So that's using flexibility solutions like energy storage. And it's using things like demand-side control and demand-side reduction to look at perhaps turning up demand and turning down demand to reflect the supply situation. And interconnection, and looking at the best use of our distributed generation assets, and then using information technology and control systems and communication systems to help to join up these new forms of flexibility like energy storage and demand control and the new forms of distributed generation, so perhaps knowing exactly what's going on with generation on people's homes if they've got solar PV. And joining all these things up into an overall smarter and flexible energy system. So that's an aim both for our innovation program and also for some of the policies that we've been putting in place. So last summer, BEIS, working with the regulator, Ofgem, produced its Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, and that set out a number of particular actions that the government and the regulator are going to take to help to introduce some of these smart technologies that I've been talking about, like energy storage, helping to make them more easily available, helping to help a wider range of consumers to engage with them. And underpinning a lot of these smart systems ideas is the fact that we need further innovation, further developments in technology, more innovative business models to help introduce this smart, flexible energy system. I'm going to perhaps whistle through this one on the industrial strategy, because I think perhaps we've heard a bit about this already, just to be aware that also in the industrial strategy there are things called the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and those are areas of, again, of innovation support for a very wide areas of activities, not just on energy, but there are also challenges relating to aging populations, to satellites, to artificial intelligence, a whole range of areas. But there are a couple of these challenges that are on the energy side. One is the Faraday challenge, which is focusing very much on development of batteries for electric vehicles and building up UK's capacity to be able to develop and manufacture electric vehicle batteries. And there's a challenge that was announced at the very end of last year called Prospering from the Energy Revolution, and we're hoping to be able to say more about that very soon. But for today, just for the rest of the last few minutes, I'm going to focus on BEIS' own energy innovation programme. So we have funding of around £500 million, so a lot of funding dedicated to low carbon innovation. And we use that innovation to help drive down the costs of new technologies, to help improve the performance of new technologies, to bring new low-carbon technologies to market and closer to commercialization. And I know that several of the exhibitors here today in ecobuild have been funded through the BEIS program, or in the past the DEC Energy Innovation Program. We support development of the supply chain, so where there are areas where perhaps we've started with particular innovations or academic development, and then we need to help bring up the supply chain in the UK for these technologies. And we support development of standards in low-carbon technologies and help to leverage in private sector R&D investment alongside the government investment. So the BEIS Energy Innovation Programme, as I said, just over £500 million of budget altogether over the next few years, up to March 2021. It covers a whole range of different technology areas, nuclear, smart energy, which I've spoken about a bit already, the built environment, very much touching on their sort of energy efficiency, household measures, and also thinking about decarbonisation of heat. We have industrial efficiency innovation to think about, renewable support for further reducing the cost of offshore wind, for example, and cross-cutting technologies, such as the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund, which is a very broad innovation support fund supported coming up to, I think, around nearly 100 small companies and different technologies that have been supported through that. And just in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to talk particularly about the Smart Energy Innovation Programme, and I'm going to focus in on one of the competitions that we've run recently in the smart energy area, which is the vehicle-to-grid competition. I'm afraid it always gets shortened to V2G. So can I ask whether anyone in the audience here or who can hear me has an electric vehicle themselves? Aha, a few takers. Now I have to put my hands up because I have a lovely Nissan Leaf. Other electric vehicles are available. So the vehicle-to-grid competition is hoping that and recognises that when we're talking about energy storage and demand control, actually, if you have an electric vehicle, that is the largest form of demand that you are going to have in your household by some distance. So the battery in your electric vehicle, as well as being extremely useful to get you from A to B and making sure that you're contributing to clean air in your area, it could also provide an opportunity to help to balance the energy system. So there's the potential for taking a little bit of energy from an electric vehicle battery and using that to help to provide energy into the grid at times when it's really needed, or in terms of managing the time when you're charging up the battery of your electric vehicle to make sure that you're not charging at the point where everybody else is turning on their kettles and watching Coronation Street or whatever it is everybody watches these days, box sets of whatever. Controlling that charging time, perhaps, as I say, taking some of the power from the battery to use at times of need. So the whole concept of vehicle to grid or vehicle into buildings is very exciting in terms of the overall smart energy system and helping to balance our energy system. So in around the summer last year, we ran a vehicle to grid competition. This has been funded jointly from the BEIS programme and also from OLEV, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles. We're putting in £30 million of funding altogether, and we'll be taking forward 21 projects, and they're a mixture of feasibility studies, some more technological development projects, and we're taking forward 8 trials, so real-world demonstrations of the vehicle-to-grid technology. And the aim is that we come out with new business models, new technologies that can help to bring vehicle-to-grid into reality. This is a new area both for the energy system players and for the vehicle manufacturers. So one of the things that we're really pleased with in this competition is that we have brought together a number of consortium. I'm going to flick through these lists of projects because you won't be able to read them here. The slides will be available afterwards, and if anybody wants to talk to me about the particular projects, I'm very happy to do that. In terms of the real-world demonstrators, just to give an idea here, so you can see in some of the project teams, we're bringing together energy companies, and the 2 examples I've got here happens to be EDF and SSE, and we're bringing in network operators, UKPN in this case, we're bringing in fleet operators, commercial car operators, the car manufacturers themselves. We're pleased that both Honda and Nissan are involved in this program, and these are going to lead, as I say, to real-world demonstrators trying out these new techniques and technologies. And it's a very good example of the sorts of programs that we are taking forwards in BEIS within our Energy Innovation Programme. So, there's lots of slides going through the individual projects and the website reference where you can find out more about these projects. If you want to find out more about the Bayes Energy Innovation Programme, we have a mailbox, smart.innovation@bayes.gov.uk, and my email address is up there as well. I grabbed that quickly because I have a non-standard Bayes email address. If you're interested, you cannot guess it. This is your opportunity to get it. You can if you Google me. I usually pop up online with Bayes. So I think we've got to the end of our time slot, so I shall stop there. Thank you very much. Thank you.